Our set of notes for today is titled Early Compromises Between the North and South. In particular, we're going to look at two compromises that address the issue of slavery, particularly whether slavery would be allowed in new territories, the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850. So the first one of those is the Missouri Compromise. And to get some of the background, we need to first start off by looking at the split between the North and the South in terms of political power early in the 1800s. So in the Senate, you had an equal split between North and South, between the free states of the North and the slaveholding states of the South. There were 11 northern states, 11 southern states, so each side got 22 seats in the Senate. But in the House, the North had a larger population, and so it got more people. So the North had more power in the House of Representatives, which also meant that the North had more electoral votes, because your total number of representatives and senators gives you your number of electoral votes. The North controlled the House because there were more people in the North, which means the North also controlled the Electoral College, who chooses the president. But the fact that the North and the South were even in the Senate at 22 seats each was very important, because this kept the South from, it kept the South from allowing any anti-slavery laws from being passed. In fact, that split in the Senate, that even split in the Senate, was a way for the Southern senators to really prevent Congress from even talking about slavery. Because, if you remember, a law has to go through the House and the Senate. So the North controlled the House, and it might pass an anti-slavery law, but that law would get over to the Senate and it would die, because the South could block it. The Senate was also in charge of approving judges who the president appoints. So these Southern senators could also keep the president from appointing any judges that had anti-slavery views. So again, for the South, that even split, that balance in the Senate was incredibly important. It was how they kept the North from dominating. And this balance kept things even between the North and the South until 1819. And in that year, Missouri applied to become a state. Missouri was part of the Louisiana Purchase, and it applied to come into the Union as a slave state. Well, this would mess up that balance between free and slave in the Senate. As you can imagine, there were northern states who were not wild about that. They did not want the South to have control over the Senate. So they protested, they argued, and fought against allowing Missouri to come into the Union. So the solution to all of this argument was what becomes known as the Missouri Compromise. And there are three main parts to it. The first was that Missouri would come into the Union as a slave state, and that's what the South wanted. In order to maintain that balance in the Senate, however, Maine would be admitted to the Union as a non-slave state. So now there would be 12 free states and 12 slave states. And then Congress added a third part to the compromise. To try to keep this problem from happening again, when more states wanted to come in, they drew a line across the Louisiana Territory, and slavery would only be allowed south of the line. So if we see the map, right, the red states on this map were the slave states. The blue states are the free states. And then the purple area, where it says unorganized territory, was the part of the Louisiana Territory that would be closed off to slavery. Slavery, any states coming out of that would not be allowed to have slavery. The orange Arkansas Territory would be the part of the Louisiana Purchase that would be open to slavery. Again, that was designed to solve the problem. And it addresses it for a while. But it doesn't solve it forever, because we know the United States continues to grow. All of that area where it says Spanish Mexico on the map is eventually going to be taken over by the United States through a war with Mexico. And so this Missouri Compromise line isn't going to help us when it comes to those areas. That only applied to the Louisiana Territory. So we're going to have the same problem again 30 years down the road in 1850. And we're going to need another compromise. Which brings us to the Compromise of 1850. So a different looking map here, where all of a sudden that area that was part of Mexico is now American territory. So again, let's go back by taking a look here in 1848 at political power and what it looks like at this time. The Senate was still split evenly, right? The country had grown, and now we had 15 free states and 15 slave states. So that balance was still there. 139 members of the House in the North, 91 from the South, which meant 169 electoral votes for the North to 121 for the South. So, what these numbers effectively mean was that the North continued to have the most political power, but the balance of power in the Senate still protected the South from anti-slavery laws. Right? The South could block any anti-slavery laws from getting through the Senate. Well, as we said a minute ago, the U.S. had acquired more land in the Mexican War, and that land wasn't covered by the Missouri Compromise. So, decisions had to be made about whether slavery would be allowed in that new territory or not. So we're almost back to the same problem. We added more land. Will slavery be allowed or not? Because of the gold rush, which happens in the late 1840s, California has enough people to become a state in 1850. And they're ready to join. They're ready to become a full state in the Union. But abolitionists in the North had becoming stronger and stronger and bigger. And they were totally against allowing any more slave states or territories. Another big issue that was being discussed and debated at this time had to do with runaway slaves. The South wanted these slaves to be captured and returned. But abolitionists, this group with growing power in the North, wanted slaves who escaped to the North to be safe. right? That once they escaped to the north, they could not be returned back to the south. And these issues are creating a lot of argument between the north and the south. You've got the conflict over what to do about California. Should it be let into the Union? If so, is it going to be slaves? Is it going to be free? What about fugitive slaves? Should we require them to be returned, or should we let them stay free if they escape? What about the rest of the territories? Should they be open to slavery, or should they be closed? These were creating a huge crisis in the United States in 1850. And again, North and South arguing in newspapers, arguing in the Congress. And once again, Congress comes up with a compromise designed to try to solve the issue. The first part of this compromise admitted California to the Union as a non-slave state. So this gave the North more states. It gave the North control over the Senate. So obviously that made the North happy. New territories were allowed to decide about slavery for themselves. This was something called popular sovereignty, basically meaning let's let the people decide whether they want to be a slave territory or a free territory. And this made the South very happy because they felt they would be able to win those votes. Something else that pleased the South was a strong fugitive slave law. And this would force Northerners to return runaway slaves or they could be punished. To balance that off with the North, the Compromise of 1850 made it illegal to buy and sell slaves in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. So both the North and the South get a couple things that they like, but they have to give up important things to the other side as well. And so kind of like with the Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850 solves the problem for a little while, but it doesn't really make anyone all that happy. Both sides are still feeling a little upset about the things that they have to give up.